How much do we really know about the life in the depths of the sea? The reality is not all that much. Everyone loves to claim how we already have mapped the sea floor. Sure, I guess over half of it has been mapped with sonar, only 27.3% with higher technology, and in reality, only 0.001% has ever been visually explored. And with that, we know the god-awful abomination is just lurking down there, already clouding out our perfect world with its ugly face and disgusting lure. I am, of course, for all new people here who don't know, talking about the anglerfish. Greg, pull up a picture of one of these things. I want you to look at this and understand that only 0.001% of the ocean has ever been explored and seen by man. And this thing has the audacity to show up and ruin everyone's life by existing in the first place. Disgusting. Okay, so enough of that. Because life is fairly prevalent down there, as we might, I guess, imagine, although it's really not as prevalent. Anyways, the question further becomes, what else could be down there? As an oceanic mining crew exists for extended periods of time beneath the waves in a facility built to withstand the pressure that is not made of graphene and controlled by a PS2 controller, everyone continues their lives, working away for minerals. However, coming into contact with a Russian ship that was sunk, it becomes apparent the crew members that were there experienced something that was well beyond their control. As an infection would begin spreading through the facility for all intents and purposes, everyone is completely boned. But what is this infection, and how does it affect the human cellular barriers? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode covering Leviathan. We kick off our story being in water. I already hate it. As an air ring then floats to the surface, we get Leviathan. Descending down to where the anglers are, Talvalantians, just begin Talvalantying, making the noises, which makes sense as they were water-dwelling, and whales are also allegedly water-dwelling. As we sink deeper into the ocean, I hate it here. Reaching the bottom of the ocean, the Tri-Oceanic Mining Corporation is down there, extracting silver and other precious metals. Also, punching anglerfish in the literal face as they show up, doing the Lord's work. Alright, that'll be the last mention of that. You guys probably get it by now. As everyone then works outside, this is extremely hazardous. Now, what you may actually find interesting is you can really adapt somewhat to this pressure. See, going from low pressure to high pressure, to a certain extent, is actually pretty easy for your body to achieve and actually survive. Deep sea operators, which is what we are seeing here, would regularly be exposed to over 70 atmospheres of pressure. However, there reaches a point where the air itself will become toxic, and at that point you are totally boned. But what humans cannot tolerate well is going from high pressure to low pressure, which we will kind of, blow that can of sardines open here in a little bit as... what in the name of all that is holy? No way these guys survived, is all I'm saying. So over at Mining Shack 7, which is what you want it to be called with this many atmospheres of pressure on this structure, materials are starting to be loaded up. They are on day 87 of a 90-day mission, 3 days from retirement. Though with an operation like this, I bet it's similar to an ocean rig or ocean oil rig. You probably make bank, and then just for the other 9 months, you just kind of hang out unless you want to go work somewhere else. So then they get to go sit in a pressurized structure on the surface for 3 more days after that. Nobody opened the door, otherwise you have a Byford dolphin incident, which is absolutely horrific if you look that up. As everyone then starts walking, I don't know. Anyways, he's losing compression suddenly as his rebreather stops on his suit. I'm not really sure how a rebreather is pressurizing the suit, given that it appears to be a closed system. I know it may seem like I'm kind of missing something Roanoke, this is an air issue like low oxygen. But I'm telling you, they kept mentioning how his suit was depressurizing. Freaking out, they then start dragging him through the door, but they have a stupid claw hand, which makes it difficult to operate any of the buttons. Okay, look, I get it. But this is a situation where he wouldn't have crashed out and been ocean gated. That makes no sense to have a suit like that where the whole pressurization is predicated on a rebreather. Also, hold up, is that Marv? So the wet bandit is drinking a product placement Pepsi after spitting on the expo board, as old Blue Eyes over here gives himself a nice pep talk in the mirror in front of everyone. Okay, maybe not that, but that would be hilarious. Also, the structure is starting to groan and shift again. Ocean Gate is inbound. Everyone is residing within the structure, and they don't really seem like great coworkers, if we're going to find out. Got a real fun house down here. The boss then gives everyone the day off, as they've been going for about 3 months straight at this point, because, the suit problem kind of freaked out old Blue Eyes here, or as he's probably going to be known as, he's going to be known as Boss Man. So the doctor comes in and gets scolded in the break room as everyone then starts eating their slop, I guess is the best way to put it. But they wouldn't have to be eating slop if they went with today's sponsor. But first, this episode is sponsored by Factor. I have done it. I have been chasing the 160s now for about like 2 years, and as of this morning, I am finally at 169.4 pounds. What has been instrumental in all of this? Eating healthy meals with enough protein so I don't crash out when I lift, but also eating a way that actually provides me, like delicious options. Factor makes it easy with their fresh and never frozen meal options, with also a variety of options, and recently they have doubled their menu with 80 rotating weekly meals that are chef crafted and restaurant quality. That's 2 times the seafood meals than before. 2 times the high protein options, which is typically what I go for anyways. Not to mention just the ease at which you can make these meals. You just put them in the microwave for 2 minutes and they're ready to eat. So it's pretty much perfect. There's also many other options. Look, we all know foundationally your health is not just dictated by how much you can run or lift. It's mostly impacted by what you eat. So if you're ready to take back your health today, then head to factor75.com and use code ROANOKEFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. All right, let's get back to it. I don't even know if they were eating slop, actually. So anyways, the doctor is scolded because he wasn't present for a medical situation of massive, depressurization of that suit. Anyways, but apparently Bossman here is beloved by his crew, so continuing to hear more Tau Valantians singing in the distance, the T-51Bs are loaded up as they check on DeJesus' suit. It's DeJesus or something like that. I gotta really figure out. You know what? Google Translate. I'll be right back. Okay, well that didn't help at all, because people were saying DeJesus and DeJesus. I'm gonna go with DeJesus. So running diagnostics, yes, the claw works very good. Wonderful. So DeJesus is then scanned to make sure he doesn't have any nitrogen bubbles in his blood, as Marv then makes a pass at Burt Gummer's wife. Sort of. She's not really Reba, but Reba adjacent. Turning off a machine, the engineer then gets smacked in the face as Creepy Ocean Spider was placed into DeJesus' suit, I'm assuming by Marv. So you may be wondering, or maybe not, since I believe it's relatively known, but what is it with the nitrogen bubbles comment? Well, interestingly, it mostly comes down to just how unusable by the body it is. Nitrogen has a purpose, it just doesn't have much of a purpose. So take oxygen, for instance. As you ascend from the depths, oxygen is being constantly used and replenished. Nitrogen, however, is not really usable in a large capacity by the body. So here's what happens. When you breathe at higher pressures, more gases are actually pushed into tissues and blood. However, because they are under higher pressure, it doesn't create an issue. When you rapidly ascend, oxygen is already being constantly used up, and if it wanted to bubble up, it's too late because it's already being used, so it just decreases constantly. However, there is not as much of a demand to use nitrogen. As a result, when it begins bubbling up, it forms literal bubbles in the tissues and bloodstream. Now you may be wondering, well, Roanoke, what about CO2? And that's a good point. But based on what CO2 actually does, it's expelled by the lungs as you breathe out, so it doesn't really bubble up as much. But because nitrogen does, again, as you may imagine, not great. So as these bubbles build up, it resorts in something known as the bends. This can actually cause a massive amount of pain in the body, such as the joints inflaming and actually damage to the joints themselves. And if large enough bubbles form in your blood vessels, which is known as an embolism, this can trigger a heart attack or a stroke, taking you out almost immediately. The only real way around this is to outgas, basically. You have to be put into a decompression chamber that slowly over time releases the pressure so that you can outgas the nitrogen naturally without it forming these bubbles. The first guy they sent really, really deep and then brought him back up definitely died, very painfully. But that's all of human history, way back to cavemen dying a diarrhea death from eating berries, which now we know are poisonous. Shout out to Unga, he was a real one. I mean, that is literally, as bad as it is, someone has to do it, so we all know not to do that. I strive to never be that human, but I appreciate the humans that do end up becoming on that list, or becoming on that list, because otherwise the rest of us wouldn't know. Life is dangerous. So anyways, Bossman is calling back to some woman on the surface as they discuss vaccines that went poorly, as then she turns off the TV with a brick. So as everyone continues vibing out, the entire structure shifts and groans once more. Yeah, about that. Marv then comes in, whose whole purpose is to hit on anything that walks and wear only boxers and be gross. I got a buddy like that, actually. He's a great man. Anyways, going to bed, a creature was in bed with him. He's a great man. He starts yelling at everyone about the thing he's still holding. I would not be holding that thing anymore, as then he's told to just straight up pipe down. Meanwhile, outside, the Claw T-51Bs are setting charges to look for more precious metals. Further out, a man named Sixpack then falls off a ledge. And you're telling me these suits are not capable of navigating up and down in water? Brother, what? Literally like a water jet on the back, like a few fans providing lift. No expense spared on these things. But this disturbs everyone as his feed is then cut out and they can't find him. He fell off Southridge apparently, and Not Reba then runs in telling everyone Six-Pack is lost as he's navigating a field of tube worms. Oh, sweet lord, why? Continuing her way through the tube worms, she ends up finding a ship of sorts with a whale fall nearby. Pretty sure I said she navigates the tube worms. Did I say he navigates? Also, you're about to see why Six-Pack is a total chode. Approaching the ship, my god, it's Russian, which is the perfect time to let you know the meter is still running. It's called Leviathan. Oh my god, he said it. That's why it's called Leviathan in the movie. And they said it as well. I love it when a plan comes together. Continuing her search for him, it's a radio as she keeps yelling out to him and he's not answering. And again, it's a radio, so either his radio is busted or he's dead and calling out won't really do much. Apparently, this ship went missing in the Baltic Sea, allegedly. So what is it doing out here? Also, this was during the Cold War. Would the Russians really have been sharing this info with us on where their ships went down? I'm gonna go ahead and guess probably not. Williams continues her search as something then comes out of the darkness and rushes her. Again, no thanks. Entering the infirmary, it's all skeletons and backwards R's. As she looks around, Six-Pack then starts yelling about how he's rich. Raiding the safe, everyone then divvies up the goods back at the mining structure. The doc here knows how to speak 12 languages, as then they start handing out suspiciously dry reports on how everyone on the boat was deceased. Great sign. Thanks for bringing that on board, guys. Fantastic. Also, while safes are secure, I really don't think they're airtight, are they? Like, especially at these pressures, for sure water got in there. Ominously floating to the safe, a Russian then gives a report on tropical infections. Something that they have never really seen before, as in the video cuts off. And this is important as well as, was this created, or was it actually existing in nature? The answer is a fantastic yes and no. They discuss why there would be two ships of the same name in different places, and how that's a little bit strange. It doesn't make any sense. And as they continue watching the footage, the ship appears to have been hit by a torpedo, so it was sunk on purpose. Boss Man ain't interested in discussing any of this in the slightest, as they now have just 2 days before they can head home. Back to the 14-hour ball-crushing factory hours. Breaking into the safe, they grab the alcohol, as apparently it was replaced in water because the boss man switched it out, because he doesn't trust any of them, and he also doesn't need a bunch of drunken crew members. The doc continues watching the tapes as Marv gives Reva Light some alcohol, and Alcohol Run over here is going for a run because she has prior military service, I am fairly certain. So as they hang out, in the immortalized words of Cortana, this thing is falling apart. Brother, no shot. If the structure you're in is going to be doing this, send the return vessel immediately. Using the world's weirdest screwdriver to work on a panel, it seems annoying. Boss Man here just continues flirting with Drunk Runner. Having 1 day left, surely nothing bad is going to happen today, which, oh lord. Alright, Marv's in the infirmary, clearly showing signs of what appears to be a bad hangover. They check his back and see there also appears to be some sort of infection and a massive amount of bruising. Bossman then calls back to Old Brick Remote, and she says, "This won't look good on your record." Meanwhile, everyone is jumping back into their T-51s to head back out. If they don't meet their quota, they will only get half pay for the month. Well, that blows, and I also feel like that's just mega illegal, but hey, I'm just some random dude online 36 years in the future. I just did the math on that too. Good lord. Anyways, back at the clinic, Marv then starts having a major immune response as well as pustules growing on his neck. That's a rapid progression of a disease, which not ideal. So as the doc then analyzes what it is, it's mutagenic and Brother's skin is starting to detach from its dermis. Also, not a good thing. So for this video though, this is actually completely ideal, as we can talk about skin anchoring and how the barriers between cells are becoming a bit more like suggestions rather than a hard and fast rule. The organism is of an unknown origin, as then he talks to ChatGPT about this, but it ain't helping. Then it suggests, well, maybe it's a genetic alteration of sorts. Shut up, robot, you don't know about genetics. So a little later on, Marv then flatlines, concluding the long-running Sticky Bandit duo. However, he's going to come back on that front in a very big way. The crew then comes back, at this point, finished for their day, as Bossman then asks how Marv could have died in 8 hours from a skin rash, sitting him in there alone without a mask and no other form of PPE to counter a complete unknown illness that has not been observed by man before. He then checks his back and sees significant bruising. Walking out, yeah, the mask that you, immediately touch and take off of your face, and then you touch your face, good work. So they have no idea how this even spreads. Absolutely congrats on your infection there, big dog. And they decide the best option is to just not panic the crew, but check to see if anyone else is exhibiting these symptoms. Requiring everyone to shower, they then run through the tests and look for bruising as the doctor here begins clearing the crew. The next woman then comes in as the doc goes and talks to old Brick Remote about what's going on and how genetics are becoming involved. Boss Man, worried about his crew because he's a real one, doesn't care about how it looks. He orders her to begin the evacuation due to a medical emergency. But oh wait, what's this? Of course, there's a hurricane 600 miles off the coast of Cuba, possibly heading this way. Okay, so you're telling me like they couldn't get a ship to come out there and pick them up in that time frame? I mean, they are supposed to be picked up literally tomorrow. This wasn't discussed that there was a hurricane coming? I think Brick Remote is lying. So then she says it's delayed by only 12 hours. Yeah, right, dude. Meanwhile, Shower Scene Girl is throwing up in the sink. These hangovers are pretty bad, and bringing her to her room, Ernie then heads into Marv's room and then talks to a dead body. I mean, let's be real here. No shot you would walk into a room with someone covered up like this. Also, who's usually used to, like, being the life of the party and who's now not responding at all. Yeah, let's totally keep talking to a bucket of spiders concealed by a thin sheet. Think, man, what are you doing? Okay, I guess he does move technically speaking as Prometheus then leaves the room. Meanwhile, Shower Scene Girl asks Drunk Runner not to leave her as she's sick. I maintain that I tell people to leave me alone when I'm sick. Give me something for the cringe and let me die. Pulling her hair out, this episode's sponsored by Keeps. Leaving the room and going to harass Marv about her hair loss, she then talks to him and finds he's leaking gross fluids as she feels her own neck, noticing that there's pretty much the same injury there. The dangers of retention. Don't look into that joke at all. And that's actually what it is. It's a joke. Anyways, entering the actual shower scene, they find Baldy here has taken herself out before she could change. Bringing her back to the infirmary, they then cover her up. Next, as nobody checks on Marv morphing over there, the doc then gives a debrief on how she took herself out, as really, everybody just kind of is like, oh, dang, that's, you know what? Shucks. Like, everyone's so casual about hearing it. Like, I'll be late because of this traffic. That's the level of, like, concern they've shown. Anyways, hearing a noise, they then go to the infirmary and find, oh, sweet Lord Marv, he is fused with Baldy. The sticky bandits are back, baby. Bringing Baldy out of the room in a bag, they then put that thing back outside where it came from, or so help me, and feeling it move, they think he's alive. They want to release Balv, as in it breaks through, and then they send it down with Boss Man, keeping it there as they put that thing outside as its tentacle gets sliced in half. As it, I don't know, for some reason, it just kind of floats away. I guess it was swimming because the other piece is still in there. I don't know what it's doing. Anyway, so it's in the facility as Drunk Runner is spazzing out hardcore in the shower, yelling, oh God. Hey, valid crash out. So checking the cameras, they look through and see a human skull, but bigger, while a medical then pulsates. Doc says these things are regenerating and can survive at these depths, as the medical then grows a mouth for some reason, and that's not going to be good later. The doc says no help is coming because they would not risk an incident to actually save them. Meanwhile, the mouthicle is probably entering Doc's office, through the air vents. Checking Marv's bed, they find the flask. Ernie then picks up fast as he suggests possibly it could have happened from what they were either drinking or eating. Ernie is crashing out as DeJesus then talks about skiing. He's in denial about it as Drunk Runner then goes for a nice jaunt alone with headphones on. Okay, it's like, what? Anyway, so Medical is still in play in this building, and then talking to Boss Woman, Boss Man then gets cut off as she looks fairly upsetty spaghetti about something. DeJesus then gets mouthicled as it just straight up crawls into his abdomen, ouchies, as Ernie then goes to go get someone as Drunk Runner is still just running around. Ernie then reports it got DeJesus, damn, 36 hours from vacation. This is like getting taken out in a car crash on the way home from work on a Friday. God, it happens to people. That's terrible. So the power now goes out for reasons unknown as something broke through a bulkhead, which I think is that's entirely unlikely. This thing is made of meat. It's not some unstoppable force. So heading to the T-51s, hey guys, you see those suits that are functionally armor and sealed and have claws? Why not pop one of those bad boys on? So everyone then locks and loads Brides of Christ, Dead Space style, using tools. Flamethrower goaded as Doc and Gray Shirt, I have to come up with a name for him later, enter the room. Spoiler, I never do. Dropping his tool, Mouthful then grabs him as something in the next room runs off. Reporting what they found, I wouldn't have touched that. Evidently, this thing also is alleged to absorb intelligence as well, and the Russians sank their own boat to protect themselves. It's very doubtful. I think something else is going on with the intellect here, but we'll kind of get there when we get to the science portion. Boss Man then devises a masterful plan. Give me 3 minutes to get to the escape vessels, and if I haven't come back, All right, you guys need to go next. Dropping blood around the area, they then start trying to lure this thing out as it appears to want your blood, or at minimum, that's how it hunts. How do they come to the conclusion that it wants your blood? If this isn't a straight rip from the thing, I don't know what is. So Doc then starts waxing poetically about how he used to do something important like developing drugs and giving them to people. Grayshirt says his wound itches as Doc then heads out to the infirmary to grab some Neosporin. Entering the infirmary, he looks at the map to remind himself about the area that he's been in for over 90 days at this point, as then he talks to ChatGPT once again about his experiences, activating the emergency escape bubbles. Not really sure why they call it that. Now nobody can escape, and they're stuck down there. Ernie and Bossman hear a thunking noise as Bossman then goes and lays down. Why? I don't know. This was bizarre. So Grayshirt then starts saying he has a weird sensation and how he's like cold as under his skin, something is beginning to happen. Going to attack Doc, his hand then goes full on mouthical as Drunk Runner runs directly into whatever this thing is and getting grabbed by Bossman and Ernie. There are now 2 of these things running around the enclosure. Doc has been infected. Now, I guess that technically means there's 3 of these things. Great. Sounding like my stomach after $87 of Taco Bell, they find the doctor release the pods as nobody should be allowed to escape lest the human race become infected. They send another message back up to the surface saying to just disregard the last message. Like, actually, no, everything is great down here. No need to worry about the message about us becoming amalgamations and skin barriers breaking down. There's no meat monsters here. Anyways, how are you? Brick Remote then says they haven't forgot about them, but it's going to take 48 hours for them to get down there to them. She has altered the deal. Pray she doesn't alter it further. They need to hold off this thing for that amount of time as Brick Remote then makes a call that appears to have not been answered. Brutal. We've all been there. Posting up in Doc's room, the thing apparently couldn't get through this bulkhead, so that's good, I suppose. Don't know why I was able to break through the last one, as in the weather report has been wiped from the system. ChatGPT says that they've also already been ruled dead by the system as well, as the stalks have been hit due to this catastrophic event. No, my gains. Meanwhile, the tentacles are tentacling in the rest of the enclosure, and evidently something has breached the area. It's not really said how, but now they have 9 minutes until this place implodes. Bummer, dude. Leaving Drunk Runner with the flamethrower, Ernie then grabs a hot pipe that just burst, which I guess he can just do that. And having a right proper domestic, Ernie then says there's a backup as he spots Doc further down the hallway as the Mouthicles begin their attack. Running off, the bulkhead gets sealed as the room then starts filling with water as Bossman then shocks the creature. Heading to the next bulkhead, they get through as Ernie is able to stop that thing from closing. Straight up Swolger status confirmed, I guess. Like, bro, do you know, Matt, like, what kind of chest press you gotta do to stop a bulkhead from closing? No, dude, you're getting straight up Dead Space 2 when you get hit by a bulkhead. Just cut in half. Your arms are gone. It's not good. So Drunk Runner almost drops to a tentacle of doom, which that's never a good thing, as Bossman then gets Signs aliened, where, you know, like when they were in the basement in Signs, and then the alien hand grabs Mr. Asthmatic. Yeah, basically that. But they're able to slice the mouthicle before it bites him. Realizing it missed its meal, the meat blob then starts crashing out as they get to their suits and want to use the air tanks to float to the top. But oh god, part of Maldi has arrived. Setting the suits down, he then squares up as it asks for help, which is pretty horrifying as both of them are still conscious somehow. Unless, was this Grayshirt? It's a bit hard to tell. I can't recognize them through the amount of blobbiness they've achieved. Either way, it appears as though they are still in there somewhat. So getting in the suit, the claw finally works on these crappy buttons as the creature's head is totally crushed and Bossman then exits the facility. The entire structure begins imploding now and then just blows up. Using the air tanks, they begin floating upwards towards the surface as the suit complains about decompression. Ejecting out of their suits, oh, they are totally dead. And we will discuss that here in a moment. Breaching the surface, oh god, the hurricane, or a beautiful sunny day. Whichever, a helicopter then arrives just in time as the Coast Guard has shown up. They fire a flare as no contact is made at first, as then they're like, oh, we're going to return to the base. Ernie then starts talking about how it's cold for some reason. Well, if it isn't humanity's greatest op in the water, sharks. Having to avoid that, the helicopter then gets to them as, oh god, the thing has arrived. This thing then pops out as they all go towards the helicopter as Bossman's head is being palmed by the creature. Alley-ooping a flare into its mouth, then blows it up, which I don't think that's how flares work, as then they board the chopper and then start heading towards an oil rig, as Still Wakes the Deep kicks off in just a few short days. Heading down the rig, it's only Bossman and Drunk Runner now, as I don't know, did Ernie? I don't know. Okay, Ernie didn't make it, clearly. But meeting up with Brick Remote, Bossman then just punches her in the face as she's like, ah yes, I didn't give up on you, and then she just sucker punched. Well, you did rule them dead in the system, which means, while I guess it's probably still illegal, but it is international waters. I don't know. Can you sue in international waters? Anyways, thus concludes Leviathan. Hello and welcome to the science portion. Before the casuals click off, let me ask you, do you know this illness could actually exist within the actual standard, capacity currently? Well, to a degree anyhow, so I suppose you can click off now, but for everyone else who is a giga-chad, we have to build the actual profile of this infection because clearly it's going to tread outside of what we would think would be possible, but actually, it's incredibly possible, and it's terrifying. You too could merge with Marv from the Sticky Bandits given just a few mutations within your genome and this disease's abilities. So let's start from the beginning, shall we? How malleable is the human genome, and could it be merged with anything else? When we take a look at the genomes and their responsibilities and the responsibilities of cellular integrity in order to keep the body from just absorbing information it comes across, we can see that this eukaryotic trait is quite important, and it stems from the idea of being multicellular versus a single-celled organism. In the evolutionary past of life, it was, and arguably still is, an all-out fight for survival. You had larger cells engulfing and destroying smaller cells. You had viruses being absolute chodes, like these interactions just third-partying everything. And over time, as is actually exhibited in humanity now with other species, some single-celled organisms would actually band together in order to survive. We see this today with certain bacteria that exist where they will actually create a biofilm that ultimately can help aid in not just environmental controls and nutrition exchange, but also actively prevent antibiotics from properly destroying the bacteria by creating this film that just kind of blocks it. As these colonies of the same species showed up, they would create an evolutionary advantage over time that allowed for their survival to be mostly assured. Of course, all the while, techniques of surviving in the environment and what could be contained within were continuing to develop. One such technique is known as conjugation. This is essentially when bacteria will spear another bacteria with a pilus. Genetic information, known as plasmids or gene islands as they are called sometimes, would be transferred between the two bacteria, which would then serve as a new resistance to, let's say, like antibiotics that may or may not be out there, and other information on invaders within the surrounding area. The bacteria doesn't even have to be living for this to happen either. If genetic information is floating around in the immediate vicinity, it can actually pick it up and then utilize that information for later. Now, over time, I'm not really sure why you would want to pick up like a loser's genetic information. Who am I kidding? Your mom is out there somewhere. Okay. Anyways, this genetic information were just plasmids, semicircular DNA that the bacteria could use. However, over time, if a trait was successful enough, in some instances, it could be incorporated into the actual genomic structure of a prokaryote. However, most of the time, plasmids are just utilized for what they offer, and this arrangement works pretty well. And then, here comes multicellularism with the chair. To become multicellular, key distinctions have to be made. First, colonies of prokaryotes are not considered to be true multicellular amalgamations because it's just a collection of single-celled organisms. I know, it's a bit strange, but that is how it's classified, and the reason is, if you take a true multicellular organism, for them to actually survive at a cellular level, they are required to have the other cells around them support them as they cannot do everything on their own, which is a bit interesting. If you take human cells and you put them in an environment where there's nutrition, those cells will actually die. But if you take cancer cells from a human and put them in an environment that has nutrition, those cells will continue to thrive. So basically, cancer is like trying to go back to a single-celled existence. But you can also think of it like this Kenyan proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. With single-celled organisms banding together for protection more aggressively, it became sort of a no-brainer that you really don't need every cell doing the same exact thing in order to support the unit. And as a result, organelles would form, ancient bacteria such as mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, would be engulfed but not destroyed. Conjugation would be lost in preference for larger, more stable genomes. The genome itself would be isolated from the cytoplasm with a secondary layer of protection known as the nuclear envelope. The cells would largely lose a lot of their independent functions in favor of being in a larger organism, which helped the cell survive. By everyone contributing, say like 10%, they could reap the benefits as opposed to independent living, where 100% contribution all the time, no matter what is required to survive. The only issue is, there are drawbacks clearly. If enough of the other cells die, it really doesn't matter how well you are doing. If you're a cell, you are going to die too. Whereas independently, if other cells die, well, that's just nutrition floating around now and you can scoop it up. Pros and cons for really both sides. However, the point here is that our cells, genomically, apart from standard mutations that will kind of naturally arise over time due to like environmental exposure and as well as time itself, because mitosis is only 99.99% effective at keeping the same genes that you have in your body. It just sucks. just from cellular division, we get older. But another big change will actually be infections, and will realistically, you're supposed to stay the same, as you do not really absorb DNA floating around for funsies. This has allowed multicellular organisms to remain largely stable, but it should be noted, however, that viruses may have actively had a hand, and still have a hand, in manipulating and changing the genome of animals to a point that it's possible even the process of fertilization may stem from leftover information imposed by a virus. So, now you are all caught up. But how does this even remotely relate to today's topic? Well, in a few ways, actually. I know, it's like, when I write these, I always set myself up for these like alley-oops. One day, I'm gonna set it up and then just completely disprove my own line of thought, and I'll just be like, well, I guess that really makes no sense at all, and then just cut to like a black screen, like The Sopranos. Did I get shot from a guy in the bathroom? Hard to tell. Maybe me, as the cameraman, got shot. Maybe the entire line of thought is actually insane that I'm writing this down and then subsequently saying it. I've been on YouTube way too long, probably. Somebody needs to send help. Anywho, what we need to understand with these medicals and mouth conglomerations is that these creatures are a combination of genetics, as made mention within the movie itself. ChatGPT was telling us that genetic alterations were detected in Marv after he was done so. But the question is, what does that really mean? Well, upon drinking from that flask, exposure appears to have been assured. Upon this happening, however, something appears off about what went down. Now, arguably the whole thing, it all appears off, but what I mean is, where was the secondary exposure? A question was proposed within the movie itself: is this genetically altering us? RoboCop clearly isn't sure, but the doc appears to have a pretty fair understanding that this disease that was running amok was more of an issue of genetic instability than creatures forming, which doesn't bode well for anything in the ocean at this point, basically, and everyone is screwed regardless, as even if you shoved an exploding flare that exists for some reason down that thing's throat or not, everything's already going to be infected. You know how much bacteria is in the ocean that will be dealing with this new, ridiculous form of bacteria? It's going to be bad. So there was no secondary exposure leading to Marv to be combined. Instead, what he was exposed to initially already contained genetic information from a fish, and that was kind of what the issue is. Whatever this thing is, and I do know what it is, at least its original form before it was turned into something even worse, is able to capture genetic information from previous hosts and then utilize it. Now the question is, what sort of impact would this have, and what would be the purpose, as well as what even would be going on during life? Well, if we go back to not only what the Russians were talking about in videos, but also Brick Remote Woman, vaccines were a large portion of this discussion. Clearly the Russians were working on a bioweapon of sorts that could then drop on the haters and turn them into Cronenberg monsters. And you should also be aware, any country that's capable of stuff is doing this. None of us are supposed to be doing this, but we're all doing it. So this would indicate that we are dealing with, this is either going to be viral or bacterial in nature. You may be inclined to believe it's rabies, and you would be correct. No, you wouldn't. You know, I wish it was rabies too. Unironically, I need to cover something with rabies. Straight up Cujo review incoming. Anyhow, based on the actual infection patterns and the process of fusing the genomes of those infected, this would require a process known as horizontal gene transfer. Longtime viewers already know this bad boy, but for those new here, horizontal gene transfer is, well, I think it's bizarre. To a degree, this may also have been the driver of adaptation within an area and the mixing of genetic information. What happens in this process is you take like a eukaryotic cell. If a virus comes along and infects that cell, during the replication process as the cell is building the virus, some genetic information from the host may actually become a part of the viral genome when it's being built. As this takes place, the virus will then go out. You could cough it up or transfer it through some blood. Hopefully not that one, because that's really bad. Maybe some other means, I don't know. You just get the virus out there. You're a vector. Typhoid Mary, way to go. And then you end up actually inside of someone else. That, phrasing. So through the billion, perhaps trillions of interactions that take place, this small snippet of your genome gets integrated into the genome of the new host. And then look at that. A piece of your genome is now in someone you don't even know. Given enough time and enough buildup in a population, this process can actually end up causing noticeable changes, driving evolution to a degree. Pretty interesting, right? Well, it's terrible. Now, it's not just viruses that can do this. It's also known that bacteria regularly causes this to happen as well, and actually may be more effective at transferring larger sections of the genetic information, given their ability to just pick up new genetic information in their environment. But I can hear you now. Well, Roanoke, wouldn't that require a bacterium to exist within your actual cell? Correct! If you are unaware, there are specialized bacteria out there that will target your cells and exist within them. I mean, again, look at the mitochondria. It is assumed that these cells were engulfed, but given that bacteria can actually hide within cells, it's not too far-fetched It's not too far-fetched to believe that the mitochondria may have actually just invaded a cell for protection, which then resulted in a standoff between the host cell and the mitochondria until it was discovered that it was releasing way more ATP than it actually needed, which in turn, your cell was like, oh, dope, dude, and then it was allowed to say. So the bacteria I'm thinking of today is tropical in nature, can hijack cells, which is important to the whole plot line, and actually has horizontal gene transfer. Also, the CDC does classify this as a Tier 1 select agent, which puts it on the same list as like the plague, anthrax, and smallpox. So, not a great playmate overall, but would most definitely be of interest to a bioweapons program taking place in Soviet Russia. We are, of course, I'm sure you already know, talking about today, Burkholderia pseudomallei. And you're probably like, the hell is that? Well, I'm here to tell you. I can't believe this horrific thing went under my radar for so long. I keep learning about new and interesting ways to die by running this channel, and surely that's fantastic for my brain. I mean, that's why I became like a microbiologist and then a scientist back in the day. I was like, oh yeah, know your enemy type of deal. Well, it appears to be making me know my enemy way more in depth than I ever wanted to, and I hate it. So non-man-made horrors well within my comprehension aside, this is a gram-negative bacteria that exists within the soils of tropical climates, such as Southeast Asia, and for some god-awful reason, it's now the Gulf Coast of the US in more recent times. And after I tell you about this, God, you're gonna be like, oh shit, because that's pretty much what I said too. So typically, this is responsible for things like pneumonia, sepsis, abscesses forming on organs, and back in the day, it was known as the Vietnam time bomb because American soldiers would contract it where it would then enter its latent phase and then show up years later if they ever became like immunocompromised or during times of extreme stress. It would mimic several other diseases such as tuberculosis, cancer in some cases, or septicemia and pneumonia. The method by which it would enter the body is fairly standard. If you inhaled or ingested or had your skin torn open for one reason or another, it would then enter the body where it would then go into the bloodstream. Upon doing so, this is where the process becomes much more concerning. After entering the bloodstream, it will then actively target your first line of defense, the innate immune system. So as always, you have two forms. There are two immune systems inside you. One is innate and one is adaptive. That's really dumb. So the innate and the adaptive immune system, that's actually a real thing. The innate is there to sound the alarm if things are getting a little too rambunctious. Is there to deal with small level issues such as maybe some bacteria gets to the skin or maybe a small viral breach. I don't know. Maybe you just injured yourself like a giant dork and it's like, oh, well, we gotta inflame the skin around this area. So it also serves to inform the adaptive if things are going out of control. When this is done, the adaptive will actually be tripped as dendritic cells will take pieces of the invader back to the lymph nodes in order to recruit B cells. Upon finding a B cell that recognizes the pathogen, that B cell will then proliferate and start releasing antibodies to kind of subdue the pathogen and then allow for macrophages to engulf and destroy them. All the while, T cells, like especially natural killer T cells, are just stacking bodies out there on every corner. However, this process is where things start to go a little awry concerning this infection. Burkholderia doesn't play around. Instead, it beelines straight for the macrophages that are attempting to destroy it. For its size, Burkholderia contains around 7.2 million base pairs, which is quite a bit of genetic information. And remember, typically with more genes, the organism is more capable. Just don't compare it to a banana because a banana has just a weird amount of genetics. So along with this, there are a ton of genetic islands or plasmids that aid in things like horizontal gene transfer, as well as kind of what the bacteria secretes, which gives it an edge. Upon coming in contact with your first line of defense, it will inject specific proteins into that cell. The macrophage is now totally boned as it is completely hijacked. Much like a virus, the bacteria will now exist within the macrophage, disrupting its function. As you might guess, this isn't ideal because without macrophages, your first line of defense begins to falter. So, not great. This disease actually has a mortality rate of 10 to 50% depending on where you are located and healthcare access, basically to cure it. You will be on intensive therapy for quite some time, followed by a complete nuking of your entire guts of all bacteria because you will be on oral antibiotics for literal months. So you don't want to catch this crap. But how does this relate to this infection in the Leviathan? Almost perfectly, actually. I want to focus on the horizontal gene transfer and the propensity of this bacteria to already pick up genetic information quite regularly. Given this bacteria was being experimented on by the Russians, it's clear it was chosen specifically for its ability to invade cells and actually ascertain certain portions of the genetic coding. In this instance, when dropped on the enemy, it would invade the body as it normally should, and then in turn, it would hijack the macrophages before proliferating and then spreading outwards to all the other somatic cells. This does two things. First, it prevents any real actionable immune response. Second, it allows for the infection to be relatively undetected as it proliferates. And a bonus third thing, it just sucks. So upon replicating, it will then enter the other cells where it will likely use these same methods of proliferation, but this is where the gain of function would come into play. It's clear, much like how it fuses with other cells, it would remove cellular barriers in place, separating cells out. But fundamentally, that's going to break the immune response, which is how everything starts going awry in the first place. It's pretty clear the Bolcaldaria would not only be incorporating the host genome to a degree, but would also have leftover genomes from other hosts that it would have then likely injected into the nuclear envelope. After this happens, the body would then conduct itself standardly and then likely read this information, which is where all the issues would arise. So we could probably say reverse transcriptase is in there as well, and then it's utilizing integrase and all this stuff, it will be combined into the genome of the person. So at the early stages, an immune response would still be launched, I guess a little bit, because obviously Marv was looking pretty sick. And would also be doing this because the somatic cells of the body would be behaving quite oddly, presenting different molecules on the surface, delineating them from self, even though they are technically self cells. This is why if you get an organ transplant, you have to be on immunosuppressants for pretty much the rest of your life, not pretty much the rest of your life, for the rest of your life, so that your body doesn't attack the transplanted organ because it will not have the MHC molecules necessary. But to this end, given that fish DNA was discovered, it's clear fish MHC molecules, or multi-histocompatibility complexes, would be presenting on the cell surface of a human because fish genomes would be influencing cell surface presentation. This would trigger that horrible hangover feeling Marv was saying, as he's having an immune response completely launched because all of a sudden there's just different organisms popping up in his body. As that, well, according to the immune system, but as that continues, more cells would be overtaken as the rejection of Marv's own cells would take place as the body assumes, oh my god, something's trying to fuse with us, and something really is trying to fuse with him actually. So this response would kick off a cytokine storm, which ultimately would lead to a flatline. Cytokine storm is when your body releases just a ton of inflammatory molecules known as cytokines, and it's basically meant to be it's like that puppy holding up the propane container with a lighter saying it's going to take both of us out. That's literally what your body does when dealing with organisms that are attacking. If you're going to lose the fight, it's because it's going to kill you. So what I do find a bit odd is when the body reanimates, so to speak. So when Marv flatlines, it's clear the bacteria is still internal to most, if not all of his cells at this point. However, the issue is we never really see if Marv maintained his own intellect like the Doctor or Greyshirt did when they spoke to the crew even after being turned. This indicates that while Marv ingested the bacteria, this may have had a slower effect, leading him to be able to flatline, enter actual brain death, and then have the bacteria utilize the still living cells, even post-mortem. So when they brought in Baldy, given the laissez-faire nature of the cell at this point, and it being controlled, it's clear to me fusion would not really be much of an issue anymore, as cells would just really not have immune responses in order to prevent them from fusing, and cells themselves just don't seem like they view another cell as different. So now, as for the intelligence thing, here's the main issue. I don't believe the bacteria is necessarily absorbing intelligence. However, if some of the brain is still alive, then that can be used for its original purpose. In this instance, it may appear as though it is smarter than it should be, but in reality, the brain would still be communicating on some level with Marv and Baldy, because Baldy was still... Baldy would have entered brain death too, because of black blood. So they weren't... I don't really know how smart they were, because we don't really see them. But we know with Doctor and Greyshirt, they were still able to talk. Their brains and memories are still there, and so their desire and, not wanting to be part of this medical is pretty, present. However, what I will say is, much like the fish DNA still being present, the human DNA is also present, and that means the monstrous creations that arise out of just, say, a piece of the host are much more influenced by the amalgamations of DNA, simply because that's what's available. Several sets of Hox genes indicating body composition and structuring. If you don't know what Hox genes are, HOX, it basically how your body is supposed to develop, I guess is the best way. So when you take a human and then you add in DNA, it's still going to have a very similar structure as opposed to a piece cut off that then is just allowed to grow into a meat monster. So as bacteria force fires these cells to enter mitosis, there is no original body plan. Instead, it's a hybrid structure that utilizes whatever genetic information is currently available to it. In this case, a combination of everything that has infected before. Now, why would bacteria do this? Pretty easily rationalized, I think. A, it's been screwed with to do this, and B, ultimately this results in its survival. By combining information from previous hosts, this gives this new body a chance to survive with better odds than previously it may have done by itself. All from just taking this genetic information snippet from some cells, proliferating, and then applying that new information to new cells. Now, is everybody completely screwed? The answer is yes. So, based on this bacteria's own propensity to just invade not just eukaryotic cells, but I'm fairly certain it would also invade other bacterial cells. It is going to just continue to spread out through the area. It will continue to affect sea life, and then all it's going to really take is somebody eating it, which we eat sea life all the time, or going into the ocean and swallowing like a weird amount of salt water, which that's always terrible. It's not going to take much, and that's ultimately going to create this massive problem. And also, look at whale falls, right? If any of these things, they just blew up that one thing and then just spread those cells, which are going to regenerate like everywhere. You're telling me fish aren't going to eat that? Nah, dude. Not an ideal situation. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be absolutely baller review. And subscribing, of course, is a great way to stay up to date when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link in the description. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At our astronaut tier, we have Kusith and Saucy Dub Socks. Thank you guys for your awesome support. Next, at the astrophysicist tier is the Prometheus, who's been holding it down forever, Death's Dancer, as well as Myura. Thank you guys as well. And at the scientist tier, we have Stutz, Frank Shaftcrank. I actually love electric cars and the anglerfish, Metric System, Invictus Echo, and Official Texan. Thank you guys as well for your fantastic support. To the rest of my patrons, as always, thank you, because without you, the lights don't turn on this place. It's going to suck to work in the dark. So I do appreciate it. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.